You just don't wake up one morning and commit a crime of this nature. Not this demented and sick and evil.
A brutal killing.
An innocent young girl should not have to worry about being murdered in her own apartment.
A dark mystery with multiple suspects.
There was this kind of bad blood between them.
He was a registered sex offender. He paints himself as a great guy, but he's lying, he's lying, he's lying.
The truth will be revealed.
He is a walking time bomb. He is just incredibly dangerous.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. In the early morning hours in Arlington, Texas, emergency services respond to a frantic 911 call.
A citizen living in the apartment complex heard glass break. They assumed that was a burglary, so the Arlington police were called.
When our officers showed up, they saw the smoke and the flames in the apartment.
The fire department arrives. They do what they're supposed to do, and that is put out the fire.
Once the flames are extinguished, the true horror of the scene is revealed.
The apartment was destroyed. It was a mess. I went into the bedroom. There was a young woman laying on her back on the bed. And the very first thing I saw was a circular, round puncture in the middle of her chest. It was clear to me that there's a stab wound.
She was burned enough to not be recognizable, but not to the point that it concealed the injuries that we found. She was lying on her back on a bed, and that part of her in contact with the bed was relatively spared from the heat. Right away, we're going to treat it like it's foul play.
The Tarrant County Medical Examiner's Office had the responsibility for positive identification, and they were able to do that with dental records.
And that's what led to the discovery that it was Missy Gral. She was 19 years old, 2.5 weeks from her 20th birthday.
Arlington police detectives Tommy Lenore and John Stanton are tasked with finding her killer.
In order to catch the assailant, you want to know about your victim. So I learned a lot about Missy right off the bat. As a father myself, she is the daughter every father would want. She was a wonderful, wonderful kid. She was a freshman at the University of Texas at Arlington. She was an honor student from a nearby high school. She was also in the band. She had very strong religious beliefs. A young lady with incredible integrity.
We found out she was also known to still be a virgin, which she apparently was not ashamed to tell people. The people who she worked with and associated with, they all were told that she had made that decision, that she was going to wait till after she was married.
Someone has robbed Missy of that future.
There was some effects to her body from the smoke, but you could still see that she had been beaten. Her legs were sprawled, hanging off the edge of the bed. She was wearing a shirt or a bra, but it was pulled up to her neck. It was burnt. Her panties were around her right ankle. And there was a pair of pants also on the floor. You could also see what appeared to be ligature marks.
To solve the murder, detectives will need to trace the last day of Missy Grubaugh's young life.
Missy worked 2 different restaurant jobs, was working her way through college. We learned that within 24 hours or so of Missy's death, she worked.
She would stay and kind of decompress from her night's work, and then they would all call it a night and she went home. The last anyone knew from the workplace was that she had gone home alone sometime after 11 o'clock at night.
Detectives work to establish time of death.
In these type of cases, what you really want to find out is, was she killed before the fire or was she killed after the fire?
If a person is dead from a fire, they will have almost certainly inhaled some soot and smoke, and we'll see that to the naked eye. And so if we analyze the blood, we will see that there's an elevated saturation of carbon monoxide in their red blood cells. In Missy Gruber's case, there was no soot to be found, and when we ran the laboratory studies, there was no carbon monoxide detected. She actually died of a stab wound to the chest that perforated her heart. She was dead when the fire got to her, and she had not begun to decompose. It could have been minutes or hours.
So, in order to establish the time of the fire, we rely on the arson investigators. I rely on their expertise and their forensics.
Arson experts determined the fire started moments before the 911 call at 3:30 a.m. With Missy arriving home sometime after 11, this gives investigators a 4 to 5 hour window for the attack.
When someone attaches arson to their crime, there's 2 reasons to set that fire, and usually they go hand in hand. One reason is to destroy evidence. Another reason is to do what we call staging, and that is to try to disguise the death as something other than what the assailant actually did.
There was information coming in from the arson investigators that the source of the fire was the front door. And then there was a trail of accelerant that led back to the bedroom where Missy was found.
If a fire is set correctly, it can have devastating consequences for an investigation as far as forensic evidence. Investigating a death in which fire has been introduced to the crime scene makes that investigation 10 times harder.
Fortunately, there was less than complete destruction there at the apartment.
If fire doesn't have oxygen, it'll go out. And what happened was the assailant shut the bedroom door, left the apartment, and the absence of oxygen in the bedroom put the fire out. You can't help but destroy things when you set it on fire, but he didn't destroy what he intended to destroy.
We were able to collect a sexual assault kit that was usable.
A key piece of evidence from this crime scene was DNA, collected during the autopsy from the vaginal swabs. But in 1994, it usually took a minimum of 6 to 8 weeks to get your results back.
DNA is a very helpful tool in investigating a death, but it's only helpful if you have something to compare it to. When you have a suspect and their DNA, you can compare the DNA that you've collected from the body.
The very nature of this crime, the arson, the sexual assault, the brutality of it, and the violence really led us to worry that we have a serial killer or a serial rapist running around.
We've got someone out among us who is a violent offender. You've got a bad individual out there, without a doubt.
But what we find is people who stage crime scenes, especially with arson, they were always either associated or related to the victim.
There did not appear to be any forced entry that gave us some direction as to maybe this is an associate of Missy's.
The careful work of forensics uncovers a key clue.
We actually found some letters in her apartment. The letters were of a romantic nature. From reading it, you could tell this was a male.
They were seemingly like boyfriend-girlfriend type letters.
You could also see in the body of these letters that she was battling with her abstinence. You could see Missy was confused. You know, she wanted the romance, and she didn't know if this individual was going to settle for the limitations. She went a little too far with him, or was going to go a little too far with him, and she was feeling bad about that. The letters also expressed anger and maybe a little animosity towards Missy. Well, they were breaking up. We identified the person who was corresponding back and forth with Missy on these letters, and his name was Ivan.
Detectives learned that Ivan and Missy were co-workers at the restaurant.
This guy was a very primary person for us right away.
We did a background check on Ivan. We found that Ivan was a registered sex offender. Ivan was convicted for having a sexual relationship with a minor. The fact that Ivan did have a criminal background, the fact that there was a little bit of a volatile nature to their relationship, it's certainly a red flag.
Some people have a very hard time letting go of someone they're involved with, and they would rather see that person dead than with somebody else.
This makes him a really good suspect because that horrible sexual assault and brutal crime could simply have been triggered in an explosion from him.
Arlington detectives have identified their first suspect in the hunt for Missy Grubaugh's killer, her boyfriend, Ivan.
We had very limited information, just the letters and so forth. But because of the state of their relationship, he's certainly going to be a primary focus at that time.
The detectives bring Ivan to the station.
Ivan's demeanor was very polite. He was very open, somewhat preppy, soft-spoken. Was certainly not a gangster or a tough guy. He seemed just somewhat, actually, to the point where he was rather meek. You could tell Ivan had feelings towards Missy, but he was also upset.
Despite their strained relationship, Ivan swears he had nothing to do with Missy's death.
Ivan said he respected Missy. He was leaning more to terminating the relationship as opposed to pursuing it. He wasn't aggravated. It was basically fading away on his part. Missy did not want it to go away. He did.
Ivan tells Lenore he was home alone on the night of her death.
Ivan did not have an alibi for his whereabouts during the time frame that Missy was killed.
You've got his background as a person who's been convicted of sexual assault, and you've got no alibi, and you've got a dead body. That makes him a very strong suspect.
In this particular case, we had forensic evidence.
Ivan did not have any problem with providing blood, hair, all of those samples necessary to do comparisons with the samples that were taken at the autopsy.
But I knew there was not going to be a forensic exclusion of any person of interest prior to 6, 8, possibly even 10 weeks. But during the interview with Ivan, he was very suspicious of an individual who he believed was responsible for Missy's death. That individual was Jeff Smith. He had worked with Missy at the restaurant. Ivan had told us Jeff Smith saw himself as a ladies' man, and Jeff Smith was pursuing Missy and did so in probably not the most respectful manner. She did not respond to his advances, and that just fueled his animosity towards her.
Jeffrey was someone who sort of had a grudge against Missy. because of something that occurred at the restaurant.
He's fired from where they work together, and he immediately assumes that Missy is responsible for getting him fired.
If you were to go back in history, I think that love and lust and betrayal would probably be the #1 reason why people end up dead.
Ivan says Jeff Smith's anger soon took a disturbing turn.
Smith started issuing threats to actually harm Missy.
Many death threats are emotion-based over domestic issues, financial issues. Is it important in an investigation because it tells you the mindset of the individual the day they said it? Yes, it's important. It's evidence. And it should be treated as such.
We were trying to find Jeffrey Smith, and he seemed to never be where we thought he was going to be. When we would show up to try to interview this guy, he was always somewhere else. The more time goes by that he doesn't make himself available, it takes it to a more suspicious level.
I was actually able to locate his girlfriend. They were living together in an apartment in Arlington, and she agreed to come to the station and speak with me. The girlfriend informed us that Jeff Smith was emotionally unstable. He was also very volatile. He had a hair-trigger temper. She was very cautious of him, actually somewhat fearful of him.
Normal, non-controlling men don't typically commit murders. It's a certain type of person who gets jealous, gets angry. And so if friends and family members describe a man as being controlling, that has some significance if you're a police officer or a lawyer trying to figure out whether the person did it.
Jeff Smith's girlfriend implied that she believed that Jeff Smith could have been responsible as well for the murder of Missy Gral. Now we have somebody that has motive. We have a very recent situation that could have easily exploded into violence and a sexual assault. That's everything this guy could have done.
Detectives press the girlfriend for details on Smith's timeline.
Jeff Smith was supposed to have been with her on the night of Missy's death, and he was not. And she couldn't find him. And then the following morning, she found a note on her windshield from Jeff Smith, who was apologizing because he didn't come home, claiming that he was with some friends. So the fact that Jeff Smith should have been at the apartment and he wasn't, and that was the night that Missy was killed, and you add that into this volatile relationship and the threats towards Missy, becomes a primary suspect at that point.
Jeff Smith's girlfriend has given police enough to make him the prime suspect in Missy Grubal's murder.
The additional information that Jeff Smith was supposed to have been with her on the night of Missy's death, and he was not, added fuel to that suspicion. I started thinking that we may be pretty close.
After days of chasing him, his girlfriend helps detectives track him down.
I think the best way to describe him is a con man wannabe. He was cocky, he thought he was cool, he thought he was a smooth talker, thinking that he's gonna sit in there with me and just blow smoke all day long and I'm gonna believe it. Jeff Smith downplayed the alleged threats and so forth towards Missy. Matter of fact, he turned it around and said that she was the one pursuing him. She was the one who had the hots for him, which I knew was an absolute lie. Jeff Smith denied any allegation of being violent and volatile. I mean, he paints himself as a great guy. I'm a good guy. Sure, I have problems like everybody else, but no, I wouldn't hurt anybody. Whoever's telling you this is just feeding you a bunch of bull. I don't think there were two words that came out of Jeff Smith's mouth that I believed. We have someone who is violent towards women, We have someone who wants to be controlling towards women. We have someone we definitely know does not like to be rejected by women, which makes him a really good suspect because sexual assaults are power plays. I can picture him as the kind of guy that thinks he's smarter than the police. So he's the guy that's gonna set the fire and fool us and send us off in another direction.
However strong the detective's suspicions, everything hinges on where Smith was the night of the crime.
Jeff told me that he was with his girlfriend that night, after midnight. I knew he wasn't because the girlfriend said otherwise. That just solidified what I knew about this guy, and that is, he's lying, he's lying, he's lying. What's interesting, though, is he does agree to give me his blood and his hair and his saliva, knowing that it's going to be compared to the sexual assault examination of Missy Gral. I've had guilty people over the years cooperate. The bad part about that, we don't know the answer for 6 to 8 weeks down the road. So I continue the investigation, working on my victimology, wanting to know more about Missy, wanting to know more about what her lifestyle was. Who could have done this?
Detectives learn that a colleague from the restaurant stayed with Missy in the weeks prior to her death.
His name was Charles. Charles, frankly, is probably one of the closest to Missy that we knew, other than Ivan. He was kind of down on his luck, didn't have a lot of money, needed a place to stay, and Missy, having the incredible big heart that she has, she actually allowed him to stay with her at her apartment, and he slept on the sofa.
Charles soon takes advantage of Missy's good intentions.
Charles steals the money out of her tip jar. Missy, being the good and wonderful kid that she is, she's also not going to put up with anything as well. She called the police department. The Arlington police made a report, and they actually issued a warrant for his arrest for theft. And Charles fled. We believe that he was still in Arlington at the time of her death. Obviously, the motive here is revenge. And he is certainly an individual that we need to find and talk to. But of course, we're on edge because we don't know where he's at. We found out that he's reportedly fled Texas.
If you're already focused in on an individual and they disappear or take off somewhere for an extended period of time, it would be of great interest to me if they were a suspect. The person has a lot of explaining to do as to why they didn't commit the murder.
Police now have 3 of Missy's work colleagues, all under investigation.
At this stage, Jeff Smith is still my primary suspect. We certainly are interested in waiting on lab results to come back on Ivan. And we would like to catch Charles, who is a fugitive. But we don't have forensics on him because we haven't had the opportunity.
Good police detectives will keep an open mind. If there are numerous suspects, you've got to investigate each of them equally with the hopes that at some point in the investigation, you're going to catch a break against one of them.
I go by the belief that you just don't wake up one morning and commit a crime of this nature. Not this extreme, not this demented and sick and evil.
We want to be able to efficiently and effectively find out who this offender is. As bad an individual as this person is, they need to be removed from the general population, and I'd like to keep them away from my son and daughter as well.
What happens next takes everyone by surprise.
Jeff Smith kidnapped his girlfriend. You leave the police department, you're telling me what a great, wonderful guy you are, and now he kidnaps his girlfriend. I mean, this guy is just out of control, but he's out of control in a very violent, felonious way. He is a walking time bomb. And if he's capable of doing what happened to Missy, he can do it again, especially now, because now he's really just incredibly dangerous. He was a fugitive, nowhere to be found. And he's a wanted felon, so to say that we were on edge is an understatement. And to say that there was an urgency to find Jeff Smith is an understatement.
Before Smith can be found, his terrified girlfriend surfaces.
He did eventually release her, but he didn't turn himself into the police. We found out that the girlfriend is okay, but in speaking with her, we were not able to get any information that would have led us to Jeff Smith's whereabouts.
Trying to find him was very difficult, and he was in a lot of trouble for what occurred.
At this stage in an investigation, when you have a primary suspect and you feel very comfortable that you're looking in the right direction and you can't lay hands on them, knowing how volatile they are, we had an investigative team that collectively was focused on getting Jeff Smith apprehended.
As the manhunt continues, the DNA tests on Jeff Smith and Ivan return. Both are negative.
If you're innocent, you're really glad there is DNA evidence available, because the same things that are such strong pieces of evidence to convict a killer can clear an innocent person.
We're humans. We have hope. God, I hope this is him. I hope this is him. But at the same time, we also know DNA is as solid as you can get as far as excluding somebody. I've also learned through my experience, you are usually going to clear a multitude of suspects before you ever find your actual perpetrator. Charles is still a primary suspect. We don't know where he's at, but you have to always be aware of the possibility that there are other suspects. That we could also have a predator out there that's not known to anyone. And we are on pins and needles.
Statistically, solvability continues to decrease as time moves forward. So you've got to get the offender located and prosecuted as soon as possible.
Going in the many different directions we're going was when I received a phone call from Missy's mother that completely changed the entire course of this investigation. Just like everybody else, other relatives and friends, she is just beating herself up saying, who could have done this, and trying to remember anything. And she recalled the day of the murder, Missy telling her on the telephone about a man whose name was Luis. And Luis is a 32-year-old man who lives in the apartment complex. He has a common-law wife, and he has a small child that Missy babysits. Well, before the mother finished all of that, she has my attention, because this guy came out of the blue. The mother continues that Luis would come over to Missy's apartment during the early morning hours, sometimes late at night, 11, 12 at night, wanting to talk to Missy, telling Missy that he believes his wife is cheating on him. And he wants to talk to her in person because he's afraid his wife would hear him talking on the telephone.
But that on this day before the incident, he was apparently over at her apartment and they were joking around. And they had what Missy described as a sort of a pillow fight.
I'm thinking a 32-year-old man over here getting into a pillow fight. When I heard all of this, I mean, my stomach dropped.
Detectives learn that Luis Arroyo also works with Missy at the restaurant.
So he works with her, he lives in the same complex, she babysits his child, comes over late at night, and he's 32 years old and she's 19. This was jaw-dropping. We need to talk to this man. This is just not normal.
Detectives have focused their attention on the strange behavior of Missy's neighbor, Luis Arroyo.
I asked if he'd come speak with me. We sat down. He was polite, cooperative, fairly good-looking guy, looks in shape, good manners, very pleasant individual, very smart individual. I explained to Luis that I was investigating the death of Missy Gral. He projected himself as just, oh, it's horrible. He was sad. I knew her. This is really horrible. I hope you solve the case. What can I do to help? So I just started explaining to Luis what my goal was, and he immediately asked me if I found the gas can. The cause and the origin of the fire was not public, all right? No one said anything about a gas can. No reason he should have known that.
When somebody tells you that they have information that's more than what you would read in the morning newspaper, you need to sort of take another tactic and look at this person in a different way. That changed the complexion of this interview to where Detective Lenore had to advise Luis that the things that he might say could be used against him in a court.
With Missy's call to her mother confirming his visit the previous day, police need to determine if he was in the apartment the moment she died.
I explained to Luis, the way I'm going to exclude the innocent in this particular case is we have forensic evidence that will not only identify the perpetrator, but it'll exclude innocent parties. That's when Luis started getting very nervous. And he said, what evidence? Wasn't she burnt up? And I said, well, Luis, the problem with the perpetrator in this case is he didn't do a very good job at destroying evidence, if in fact that was his goal. Because we do have evidence. We have DNA evidence that the perpetrator left behind. But Luis, the good news for you is this DNA will also exclude you, and then I can move on. So with that said, I would like you to give me your blood and your saliva sample so that we can compare it to the DNA and get you excluded. And he said, well, I can't do this right now. I have to take my son to the park. And I said, Luis, come with me for a minute. I had Luis stand up, and we walked over to a window, and I said, it's pouring down rain. You're not going to the park in pouring rain. He goes, well, I've got to go. I just remembered it. I have to leave.
It was very odd that suddenly this individual who was thought to be agreeable to having his samples taken and do whatever it would take, in his own words, to get himself eliminated as being involved in this murder, suddenly wasn't able to make the time to provide the samples.
We had no probable cause. I had no evidence to arrest him. I mean, I don't issue an arrest warrant based on my gut. I issue it based on evidence. So I said, well, are we going to do this? And Luis said, yes, we're going to do it. And I said, when? And Luis says, call me tomorrow, and we'll set it up. I said, okay. And he left.
With Arroyo now their top suspect, the detectives go back to the co-workers he shared with Missy.
One of the employees was talking about how Luis was so distraught over the death of Missy Gral, and that he really hoped they'd catch the killer that raped and murdered Missy. The fact that Missy was sexually assaulted was not public. It wasn't revealed to Luis Arroyo when I interviewed him that day. We just simply said we have DNA and that it wasn't burned up. That can be anywhere. That could be anything. But he specifically said to co-workers that she was sexually assaulted. Only the killer would know that.
When police visit Arroyo's home, they hit another problem.
He had left. And at that time, his wife wasn't sure exactly where he went, but that he'd gone out the previous evening and she hadn't heard from him since then.
I had to explain to her, listen, I'm investigating the murder of Missy Gral. I need to speak to Luis because he knows her. She babysits y'all's son. Because of that, he's a suspect. What can you tell me about that night?
So Louise's wife came to the station voluntarily and provided a lengthy written statement.
On the night of Missy's death, about 10 o'clock at night, Luis's wife heard Luis go out. Now that's not unusual because he normally goes for a jog. She's awakened later by the sound of Luis coming inside and taking a shower. In her mind, he's done his jog, but then he leaves the apartment a second time. He returns, he takes a shower again. So she gets up, she demands to know what's going on. Luis tells his wife that while he was out jogging, he heard a woman screaming. Running in the direction of those screams led him to an apartment, and he sees that the door is ajar. So he runs in there, and he sees a woman laying nude on the bed. There was blood in the middle of her chest. There was no pulse. So he attempts CPR, but he couldn't stay there because the smoke and the fire was so overwhelming. And he told his wife, I believe that was Missy, who I saw. He didn't call 911. Why would you not call 911 after you've seen all of this? All of this was very suspicious. The bond between a husband and a wife, that's tight. And by nature, even in illegal acts, they'll want to cover for their loved one, or they'll want to protect them. I have to ask myself, well, why didn't the wife come to me and tell me this the day of the murder? Was it denial? And so as I'm explaining to her what we know, I believe that during the course of that interview with her, she just realized, my God, he did this.
The wife of Luis Arroyo's statement to police places him in Missy Grubaugh's apartment. They must now track him down.
She informed me that Luis is in San Antonio and he's staying with her parents. He was arrested by the San Antonio Police Department and transported to the county jail. When I came face to face with Luis, this was not the same person that I had talked to a short time earlier. Completely different human being. Incredibly withdrawn, slumped over, head down. I guess one of the ways you want to describe it is just a beaten person. I don't know what made Luis suddenly just open up as much as he did, because what's interesting is this, he does open up.
Luis started with that they were going to have consensual sex, and that it was completely agreed upon by Missy that that would occur.
He claimed that it was a tender, wonderful moment, which we know to be absolutely hogwash. That didn't happen.
He had found the knife, which was just a kitchen knife. We pretty much allowed him to indicate where he stabbed the victim.
Then he puts on what I believe is this show of falling on the floor and crawling around and acting like you're losing your mind. That was just a show. With all that said, he provided enough to solidify and to support evidence it was him, that he did do it.
With Arroyo's confession in hand, detectives put together everything they know of the events leading up to Missy Grubaugh's death.
At approximately 10 p.m., he leaves his apartment under the pretense of doing his jog. After 11 o'clock, he goes to see Missy. He knocks on the door. He does that all the time. She's not alarmed by it. She allows him inside. And during the time Luis Arroyo is in that apartment with Missy Grubaugh, he rapes and murders her. After he kills Missy, he has to do something. He has to destroy the evidence. So he gets in his car, he goes to a gas station and fills up a 1-gallon gas can. Goes back to Missy's apartment, goes into her bedroom. He douses her with gas and all around the bed, in the apartment, in the bedroom, up to the door, lights the fire, shuts the door, and leaves. He goes back home. He showers. After he showers, he wants to go back to the apartment to make sure that it's on fire. He goes back to the apartment and it's not on fire. The reason being is because there was not enough oxygen in that room from shutting the door. He sets a second fire. After that, he goes back to his apartment again. He showers, cleans up. Luis Arroyo is a textbook psychopath. I mean, this guy's a predator.
A case like this is a sad thing. It makes you angry that somebody would waste somebody else's life like this for such a thing as a sexual assault.
The DNA analysis returned, and as we expected, the matches were statistically amazing that it would be anyone else but Luis.
Despite the overwhelming evidence, Arroyo backtracks.
Luis Arroyo pled not guilty. We had a trial. The defense tried to explain the actions as something other than the psychotic predator that he is. And the jury didn't buy it and convicted Luis Arroyo of capital murder.
In January 1997, Luis Arroyo is sentenced to life without parole. Charles was never prosecuted for the theft charge. Jeff Smith was sentenced to 4 years in prison for the kidnapping.
What's justice? I mean, nothing compares to what happened to Missy Gral. Nothing.
It would never bring back your family member. It would never bring back a daughter. But in the society in which we live, that's about all that we can hope for. That we do identify the offender and let the justice system do the rest.
I feel better knowing that Luis Arroyo is no longer on the streets. But once that sense of comfort wears off, the fear sets in that there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Luis Arroyos running around out there.